Have you ever stopped to think about how a simple gesture of kindness can transform not only one day, but a lifetime? Imagine an orphan girl, alone on the icy streets, with no one for her, invisible to the world, ignored by everyone. Now, imagine that in the middle of this abandonment, she sees an elderly lady stumble and fall on the sidewalk. And at that moment, even with cold, hunger and fear, this girl makes a decision that no one expected. She runs to help. How many times in the rush of life have we ourselves ignored someone in need of help? Have you ever been there? What no one knew was that that meeting, apparently so ordinary, was about to trigger something unimaginable. A twist capable of changing destinies, and what happened next will surprise you. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and come with me to find out how it all started. The city awoke shrouded in a fine mist, where the timid light of dawn could barely break through the heavy clouds. The sidewalks glistened with the reflection of the previous night's drizzle, and the icy air cut through the skin like small invisible needles. People hurried through the damp streets, their faces curled up inside their thick coats, carrying briefcases, bags, and worries, each one immersed in their own routine, dodging puddles of water and ignoring everything that was not within their hurried paths. It was another one of those grey days when haste made everyone invisible to each other's eyes. In the middle of that apathetic scenario, a small figure walked that clashed with everything else. His steps were small, careful, almost rehearsed so as not to attract attention. Clara, only 10 years old, already knew that city like few others. Not because he lived there, but because he survived there. The jacket he was wearing barely covered his small body. The sleeves were frayed, and the frayed hem brushed against the wet sidewalk. On her feet, the worn shoes left her little toes almost exposed, red from the constant cold. Her hair, once long and silky, now fell in scruffy strands over her pale and thin face. Since she was 7 years old, Clara had nowhere to turn. The loss of her parents had thrown her into the world in an abrupt and cruel way. With no family, no home, and no protection, she was forced to figure out too soon how to survive in a place where almost no one looked twice at a child alone. Living on the street was a daily exercise in hope and endurance. Each dawn represented a new challenge to find something to eat, a sheltered corner to rest, and above all to escape the dangers that lurked around the dark corners when the sun hid. Even in the face of so many difficulties, there was something in Clara that abandonment could not erase. She carried within her a kind of light, a rare purity, almost incomprehensible to those who saw her sitting on the steps of bakeries or leaning against the windows of cafes. Her eyes, though tired, still held a soft glint of hope, as if, somewhere, within her, there was still the certainty that the world could be a better place. While many in her situation hardened their hearts to protect themselves, Claire continued to see beauty in the little things, in the dry leaves that the wind swirled, in the sound of children playing in the distance, in the aromas that escaped. From the pastry shops, the streets were his home, but also his battlefield. Every day he passed by the same faces that never stopped. Men in ties, well-dressed women, young men entertained with their phones, mothers pulling children in a hurry, all seemed to cross it as if it were just another piece of urban scenery. No one asked his name. No one offered him a smile. In fact, most of them made a point of looking away, as if the mere fact of recognizing her was a nuisance, a responsibility they wanted to get rid of quickly. Even so, Clara maintained a quiet and meticulous routine. He knew where to find the bakeries that, at the end of the day, separated the stale bread. He knew the time when the market employees left for lunch, and sometimes left an imperfect fruit in an accessible corner. He also knew which squares were less cold at night, and which corners of the city offered at least a little protection from the biting wind. And despite all these strategies that she mastered, what really kept her standing was the inner faith that one day something would change. The nights, however, were the hardest parts. When the movement of the streets decreased and the lights in the windows were turned off, the loneliness became almost unbearable. In the moments when the silence was interrupted only by the distant noise of sirens or hurried footsteps of strangers, Clara would curl up in some corner, hugging her knees and staring at the overcast sky. As much as the stars were rarely visible, under the heavy clouds, she liked to imagine that above that darkness there was still a starry sky watching over her thoughts. The winter of that year was especially harsh. Temperatures had plummeted, and winds cut corners with merciless force. Even so, that morning, Claire went on her usual walk, as she did every day. Her stomach growled softly, but she had already learned to live with hunger, as someone who learns. To live with a noisy neighbor. Knowing that there is no way to escape, all that remains is to endure. With firm steps, he crossed the center of the city towards the bakery where, with luck, he could get some bread from the day before. It was then that, without any warning, something unexpected happened right before his eyes. Now, I want you to leave your like, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments which city you are watching. The cold of that morning seemed to let up, and the icy wind blew between the tall buildings, whistling through the cracks of the narrow streets. Clara pressed her arms to her chest as she walked in the well-known direction of the bakery, where she was sometimes given a piece of stale bread, enough to cheat hunger for a few hours. Her watchful eyes swept the sidewalk, not only out of habit, but because life on the streets had taught her to always be alert. Every movement, every expression, on the hurried faces, every detail could mean opportunity or danger. But in that instant, it was something completely different that caught his attention. Across the street, a small commotion seemed to form, albeit silent. People slowed down for a brief moment, glanced quickly, and moved on. On the floor, an elderly lady sat there, visibly disoriented, with her purse slumped by her side and one of her shoes slightly out of her foot. His woolen scarf swayed in the wind, and his grey hair escaped in thin strands down his pale face. It was a stark contrast to the indifference around her, as if her suffering were just another everyday element in the city's indifferent routine. Clara felt her heart tighten in her chest. The instinct he had always carried, that desire to help, spoke louder than any fear or hesitation. Without thinking twice, he looked to both sides of the street and crossed quickly. Her little feet almost slipped on the damp pavement, but she kept her balance, following over to the fallen lady. While the adults avoided eye contact, diverting the path as if the problem did not exist, a 10-year-old girl, homeless and without resources, was the only one to extend her hand. He approached, slowly respecting the old woman's space, and gently held her cold hands. The wrinkled skin was cold to the touch, and the joints trembled slightly. It was not known whether from the cold or from the fright of the fall. Clara carefully helped the lady to sit better, leaning her against a nearby bench that was right there. The woman's eyes, initially frightened, met Clara's with a different brightness, a mixture of surprise and gratitude. For a few moments they were silent, taking a deep breath, while the flow of people remained indifferent around them. The elderly woman, still recovering from the fright, ran her hands on her knees and arm, as if checking if anything was hurt. The fragile tone of his breathing indicated tiredness, but the expression soon softened into a discreet smile. The wrinkles around the eyes followed the movement of the lips, transmitting a rare tenderness, the kind that only suffering and the experience of life can shape. Her eyes were deep, loaded with stories that Clara could never imagine, but that at that moment seemed to meet the stories of the girl herself. Without realizing it, Clara sat next to the lady, remaining close, like a reassuring presence in the midst of the hurried chaos of the city. The silence between the two was not uncomfortable, but rather comforting, as if they somehow shared a mutual understanding of what it meant to be alone in the world. After a few minutes, the lady began to ask soft questions. Her voice was low, but it carried a welcoming warmth. He wanted to know where Clara came from, where her mother was, if anyone was waiting for her at home. Clara, in that sweet and resigned way, responded with the same sincerity as always, without victimizing herself, just sharing what life had offered her so far. He said there was no one else. Her parents had left too soon, and since then she has walked the streets, trusting that somehow God still cared for her. His eyes didn't carry hurt as he spoke, but rather an admirable strength for someone so young. The lady listened to each word attentively, shaking the girl's hands gently, as if holding a fragile treasure. It was impossible not to be moved by that small child, facing the world with such courage and dignity. Time seemed to slow down around them. For a few moments, the distant horns, hurried steps, and buzz of the city seemed to fade, leaving only the cold wind and human warmth of that unlikely encounter. The lady observed every detail of Clara, as if she were trying to engrave her image in her memory. There was a mixture of compassion and something more, something that not even Clara could perceive at that moment. After a few minutes, the woman, already recovered, adjusted her purse next to her, put on her slippery shoe again, and stood up carefully. Before leaving, he thanked the girl once again, his eyes now shining with contained emotion. The smile she left for Clara carried a sweetness that contrasted with the coldness of the environment. And then, with slow steps, she disappeared into the crowd, swallowed up by the hurried movement of people who had not even realized the story that had just happened there. Clara remained seated for a few moments, looking at the void left by the lady's departure. He didn't know her name, nor where she had gone. He only felt a strange sensation within him, as if that encounter carried a meaning greater than his mind was yet able to comprehend. The wind blew hard again, causing the girl to curl up again inside her thin coat. She got up slowly and resumed her walk towards the bakery, but this time there was something different pulsing in her chest, as if small invisible gears had begun to move in the silent destination that awaited her. Night came, dragging the cold wind through the alleys, while the yellowish lights of the streetlights flickered under the insistent drizzle. Clara, as she did every night, sought shelter in the corner of the old alley that she already knew like few others. There, among empty boxes and pieces of cardboard, he shaped his small refuge against the cold. That space, although precarious, was the closest to a home she had. The silence broken by the distant noise of cars and the noise of metal doors being closed marked the end of another day. But that night, something inside her seemed different. It wasn't just the cold that tightened his chest. There was a new sensation, hard to name. As he watched the overcast sky, his thoughts returned insistently to what had happened that morning. The lady's face, her gentle smile, the soft touch of her wrinkled hands. Everything still seemed very vivid. Clara did not understand why that. Memory caused a certain tightness in her chest, but also a strange hope. Maybe it was just another passing encounter, like so many other faces that crossed her path every day. But there was something in that look of the lady that looked like no other. Something serene, but at the same time full of intentions that Clara could not decipher. He closed his eyes and tried, as he always did, to imagine a different future, even though he knew that reality, until then, had never given him many options. Still, that night's sleep came faster, lulled by the memory of that meeting, when the dawn light began to penetrate the cracks between the buildings, bringing with, at the sound of the first movements of the city, Clara was awakened by an unusual noise, the engine of 2 cars parked near the alley that served as a shelter. His eyes, trained to be suspicious of any strange movement, quickly swept the scene. 2 dark vehicles with partially lowered windows remained stationary as the doors opened. Slowly, from inside them came 2 well-dressed women, accompanied by 2 policemen. The women wore sober clothes, carried briefcases in their hands, and looked toward the alley with firm but non-threatening expressions. Clara's heart raced. The first reaction was pure panic. For years, he learned that the approach of unknown, adults even more accompanied by police officers, almost never meant a good thing. She tried to retreat, partially hiding behind one of the stacked cardboard boxes, but the women had already located her. Their expression, however, was not one of disapproval. There were no shouts, no stern orders, just a delicate smile and a soft call by his name. Clara hesitated. It was not common to hear his full name being called by strangers. How did they know who she was? Fear mingled with confusion as his mind searched for an explanation. There was always the risk of being taken against her will, being sent to some orphanage or worse, being accused of something she hadn't done. The world of the streets had taught us to distrust everything, to protect ourselves from easy promises and overly smiling faces. Still, the tone of the women was different. There was no harshness, just a kind of genuine care in the voice. Even afraid, Clara ended up allowing them to get closer. One of the women, with a welcoming smile, crouched down to stand at the girl's height. With a gentle look, she explained that someone very special had asked them to go there to look for her. These words sounded strange to Clara's ears. Who, after all, would care so much as to send social workers and police just to find her? There was no one. At least that was what he had always believed. While the police remained a few steps behind, discreet and attentive, the two women continued to speak calmly. The gestures were soft, and the words seemed carefully chosen, as if trying not to frighten an injured child. Although the initial fear still hammered in her chest, something inside Clara began to quiet down. There was a feeling that, perhaps, the danger was not there, and yes, something completely new and unknown. Accepting their invitation, Clara was led to one of the cars. The doors were opened carefully, offering her a comfortable and heated seat, very different from anything she knew. For the first time in a long time, she felt the warmth of the warm air touch her icy face, bringing a relief that almost made her relax. On the way, silence dominated the interior of the vehicle. The assistants seemed to respect the space and time that the girl needed to absorb what was happening. The streets they passed through were known to Clara, but the direction they took surprised her. It was not the path of ordinary orphanages, nor of the institutions he had seen on other occasions. It was as if they were driven to a specific, carefully planned destination that was not part of the usual paths I knew in the city. The scenery was transformed, and the simple buildings were replaced by wide streets with elegant houses, surrounded by well-kept trees and impeccable gardens. The questions piled up in Clara's mind like clouds about to break, but for some reason, she remained silent. It was as if, at that moment, the mystery weighed more than the need for answers. Something big was about to happen. Every minute inside that car further increased the feeling that his life was somehow about to change. The white walls of the temporary orphanage looked cold and empty, even with the few colorful paintings hanging in the hallways. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air, mingling with the muffled sound of hurried footsteps and distant voices. Of the caregivers, Clara, sitting in a small chair near the window, watched carefully the movement outside. Every car that parked in the yard, every face that appeared at the entrance, was scrutinized with attentive and suspicious eyes. The feeling of being there was strange and uncomfortable. Although she was no longer on the streets, the environment still carried a familiar loneliness, as if abandonment still followed her in silence. His body was still trembling slightly, not from the cold this time, but from the uncertainty. The mind tried unsuccessfully to understand everything that had happened in the last few hours. The meeting with the social workers, the way to that orphanage, the calm look of the women in the car. It all felt like a strange dream from which she could awaken at any moment. But reality was there, beating hard in his chest. For the first time in years, she was under the roof of a solid building, with warm blankets and food served at the table. Still, the emptiness in the stomach was now replaced by the whirlwind of unanswered questions. As he watched the grey sky through the window pane, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching down the corridor. Firm steps, accompanied by a slight drag of expensive shoes across the waxed floor. Clara's heart raced, feeling that something different was about to happen. A few seconds later, the door was opened gently. There, framed by the soft light of the hallway, a familiar figure emerged. It was the lady on the sidewalk, but now with a very different appearance from that rainy morning. She wore an elegant beige wool ensemble, wore discreet jewelry, and had at her side two people who looked like lawyers, as well as a personal assistant, who carried a carefully sealed leather briefcase. The smile that the lady offered Clara when she entered the room was warm and welcoming, radiating a rare serenity, as if she already knew exactly what she was about to do. The girl's eyes, still frightened, began to fill with involuntary tears. There was something about that presence that conveyed security, as if, finally, after so long, someone saw who she really was, not as the girl on the street, invisible to the eyes of most, but as someone who mattered. The woman, who now formally introduced herself as Donna Beatrice, sat in front of the girl with the lightness of someone who did not want to intimidate. The words that followed, spoken in a soft and firm voice, carried an immense weight, but at the same time an inexplicable comfort. She said that she had been a widow for many years, that she had no children, and that, despite having a fortune, that many would consider enviable, She carried within her a deep emptiness since the death of her husband. Her life had been filled with social commitments, travel, and charitable works, but even so, the feeling of incompleteness accompanied her in silence. Then, on that grey morning, when she fell on the sidewalk and saw everyone around her turn their faces, she was surprised by something she didn't expect. The genuine kindness of a small, fragile girl, yet brave enough to cross the street and reach out to her. A simple gesture, but one that, for her, meant everything. Donna Beatriz confessed that at that moment, she saw in Clara something that she had not seen for a long time: purity, courage, and generosity without any interest, something rare in an increasingly hurried and indifferent world. As she spoke, her gaze did not deviate from the girl's, as if each word she said was an attempt to reach the wounded heart behind those brown eyes. She explained that since that meeting, she has not been able to get Clara out of her mind, and that was why, upon returning home, he immediately called his lawyers and personal team to locate the girl and bring her story to light. It was not difficult to find her, as the social assistance records indicated Clara's presence on the streets of the city a few years ago. Everything else was a matter of a few hours. Clara's emotion grew with each word. It was hard to process everything I was hearing. All her life, accustomed to surviving on the bare minimum, she now found herself facing a possibility she had never dared to dream of. Donna Beatriz continued, revealing her true intention with that visit. She wanted to offer Clara a chance to start over, not out of obligation, but because she felt that this meeting had a greater purpose. She spoke from the heart, making it clear that it was neither charity nor pity, but a genuine desire to form a bond. In Clara, she saw the daughter she never had, someone with whom he could share what was left of his years, and more importantly, someone to whom he could offer love, security, and a new life story. Each sentence crossed the girl's chest as a mixture of relief and incredulity. Fear gave way, little by little, to a sense of welcome that she had never experienced. The presence of the lawyers and the personal assistant was not intimidating. On the contrary, it demonstrated that Donna Beatriz had thought of everything seriously. It was not an impulsive decision, but something planned, thoughtful, and legitimate. All the care with the legal process showed how much that woman was willing to give Clara much more than a roof. She wanted to give her a new life. Clara remained seated, feeling her hands sweaty, her chest racing, her eyes shining in silent tears. It was like living inside a dream, one of those so beautiful that the mind tries to preserve with all its strength, so that it does not disappear when it wakes up. She never imagined that that small gesture of kindness on the sidewalk could generate such a twist in her story. The image of the fallen lady, the indifferent faces of others, and her decision to help came back strongly in her memory. Now, as the turning point of her existence, while Donna Beatriz continued talking, time seemed to slow down. Every word, every smile, every look carried a promise that something extraordinary was just beginning, and although she could not yet comprehend the size of the coming change, Clara already felt that at that very moment, her destiny was being completely rewritten, line by line. The following days were filled with a succession of events that, for Clara, still seemed to belong to a distant, almost unreal world. The girl, accustomed to the improvisation of the streets and the silence of the cold alleys, suddenly saw her life cross a completely unknown path. After the legal procedures, carefully conducted by Donna Beatriz's lawyers, provisional custody was finally granted. The bureaucracy, which so often separates lives, in that case served as a solid bridge that would unite two destinies marked by loneliness in such different ways. When the luxury car finally parked in front of the imposing house where she would now live, Clara felt the weight of the unknown tighten her chest even more. The mansion, with its high walls covered with manicured ivy and a wrought iron gate, seemed to come out of one of the tales she had once heard in her distant childhood. As soon as the gates opened, revealing the sprawling, manicured gardens, the delicately carved fountains, and the immensity of the building in front of them, the impact was almost overwhelming. Every detail, from the stone path to the main door, carried an elegance that, until that moment, only existed in the girl's imagination. Crossing the grand foyer was like stepping into sacred territory, where every sound seemed to echo off the high walls ornamented with antique paintings and mirrors. The floor shone under the crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling, and the soft scent of fresh flowers mingled with the pleasant warmth of the room, dispelling any memory of the icy wind that had accompanied her so much. Clara's eyes tried to absorb every piece of that new world, but her mind still struggled to accept that all that in fact was real. In the early days, every simple gesture turned into a challenge. Sitting at the table for hearty meals, picking out clean new clothes, lying down in a spacious room with a plush bed and warm blankets, everything carried a bewildering weight of novelty. The body, used to shrink to warm itself in the dark corners of the city, now took time to relax on the fluffy and enveloping mattress. Even the hot, plentiful and long baths seemed like an almost surreal experience for those who had become accustomed to facing the cold water of public fountains, or the few drops of rain enjoyed on summer nights. Donna Beatriz, with her patient delicacy, observed Clara's every move with attention and care. He understood, with the wisdom of the years and the sensitivity of someone who had also known loneliness, that this process of adaptation would be long and delicate. He never pressured her. Instead, it offered small gestures of daily welcome. A smile at dawn, a cup of hot chocolate in the afternoon, quiet bedtime stories. Every little detail carried a silent message, teaching the girl that there, finally, she had found a safe haven. Still, Clara carried within her a silent fear, difficult to be dispelled. In many moments, while watching the new mother organize her routine, talking to employees or reading in her favorite armchair, the girl felt a tightness in her chest, as if all that could fall apart at any moment. It was as if, at any moment, someone knocked on the door to return it to the cold streets from which it had come. The distrust did not come from ingratitude, but as a natural defense of those who, for years, learned that happiness was always temporary. At night, while silence took over the immense house, Clara used to walk slowly to the bedroom window, watching the moon among the high treetops in the garden. At such times, thought wandered through difficult memories, mixing the uncertain past with the unexpected present. She still didn't know how to allow that new feeling of security to take up space within her, without the fear of being suddenly torn away. Donna Beatriz, understanding the barriers that needed to be overcome, did not force approximations. Each gesture was built with the care of someone who plants something fragile, patiently waiting for time to bloom. With pleasant conversations during breakfast and short walks through the flower gardens, he sought to create a solid and, above all, true bond. He never used grand words or hasty promises. He just repeated, whenever he felt the girl hesitate, the same simple but powerful message. This was now her home, and no one else would take it away from her. Gradually, small signs of confidence began to emerge. Clara was already able to let out spontaneous smiles during meals, allowed herself to lie quietly on the soft bed and even choose alone the clothes she wanted to wear. One day, for the first time, she asked the cook for a specific dish, a gesture that for many would go unnoticed, but which, for Donna Beatriz, was a subtle and exciting milestone in that transformation process. The surrounding environment also collaborated for the reconstruction of that new chapter. The employees of the house, guided with the same affection as the owner, treated Clara with respect and naturalness, never showing mercy or superiority. Each, in their own way, helped to build a space where the girl could grow up free from the shackles of mistrust, surrounded by examples of care and kindness. The mornings gained a new rhythm. Clara began to participate in the small routines of the house, accompanying Donna Beatriz on brief walks through the extensive corridors or venturing into the library full of old and colorful books. The stories contained in those books, filled with princesses, heroes, and distant kingdoms, seemed to come to life before his eyes, creating a curious parallel to his own unlikely journey. Even so, in some moments of silence, the girl still woke up during the night, taken by confusing nightmares that mixed the difficult past with the welcoming present. On those nights, Donna Beatriz, hearing the light footsteps in the hallway, sat on the edge of the bed and, in silence, just held her hand until sleep returned to rock the girl. It was a firm and serene touch, like a silent reminder that she was no longer alone. Without realizing it, day after day, Clara allowed herself to give small fragments of her trust to this new world. The cold walls of fear slowly began to give way to something new, something she had not known until then, the sense of belonging. And, even without yet understanding all the profound changes that were taking place around her, Clara began to take the first steps towards a life that one day she never dared to imagine. The months followed their course like a serene but constant river, carrying with it the transformations that Clara herself could barely perceive at first. The girl, who had previously walked the streets with small steps and eyes alert to danger, now walked new paths, no longer of cold concrete and dark corners, but of illuminated corridors, rooms full of books, and spaces that overflowed with possibilities. With each dawn, a piece of a completely different world opened up before her. Donna Beatrice, with her silent patience and always attentive look, took care that each step of this new path was firm and safe. He understood, with the wisdom of someone who had already witnessed the ups and downs of life, that deep wounds do not heal overnight. Therefore, each decision was carefully thought out. Among these decisions, one of the most important was Clara's enrollment in a high-level school, where she could develop not only her intellect, but also the confidence she had lacked in previous years. On the first days of school, Clara felt the impact of being surrounded by children from worlds so different from her own. The impeccable backpacks, the aligned uniforms, the new and colorful notebooks contrasted with the still fresh memories of when everything he owned fit in a small improvised bag. But even in the face of the evident differences, the girl carried something that no one there had, the strength of someone who had already faced the worst and yet kept purity in her eyes. The teachers, upon learning about her story, were instructed by Donna Beatrice to treat her naturally, without exaggerated privileges, but with the necessary support so that she could follow her studies and, above all, feel integrated. Gradually, Clara got used to the routine of classes, the new books, the math lessons, the literature readings, and even the difficulties of grammar. Everything was new, but she demonstrated a thirst for learning that surprised everyone. It was as if each new word learned, each problem solved, represented a victory over the difficult past. In addition to school subjects, Donna Beatrice believed in the importance of offering girls experiences that went beyond the limits of classrooms. Thus, Clara began attending music lessons, where her delicate fingers learned to run through the piano keys smoothly and firmly. The music, with its harmonious chords, seemed to heal something inside her, filling old voids with sweet melodies. There were also dance classes where, for the first time, her body learned movements of lightness and grace, contrasting with the heavy and tense steps that life on the streets had taught her. Another essential point in this journey was therapeutic follow-up. Donna Beatrice, aware of the invisible marks that the girl carried, made a point of providing regular sessions with a specialized psychologist. There, in careful and respectful conversations, Clara began to access difficult memories, to understand confusing feelings, and, little by little, to allow herself to release the pains that for so long had been stored. The tears that once flowed on cold and lonely nights were now welcomed by words of comfort and understanding. Despite all these external changes, what most impressed everyone around was the inner transformation that Clara manifested so naturally. In the midst of so much luxury and possibilities, she never lost the essence that has always guided her. There was no arrogance, no superiority in his gestures. On the contrary, Clara stood out for her genuine humility, the always ready smile, and the respect with which she treated each person in the house. From the drivers who took her to school, to the gardeners who lovingly tended the mansion's vast gardens, everyone received the same attention and kindness from her. In the hallways of the house, it was common to see her greeting the employees by name, taking an interest in their families, asking how their days were. He distributed small thank-you notes, helped to serve the table when he could, and whenever he saw someone with a difficult task, he approached with a sincere desire to help. It was as if the time on the streets had taught him to see the value of the little things, the importance of each person, regardless of the position they occupied. Donna Beatrice, observing these attitudes from afar, felt a deep emotion take over her. As much as he had planned to offer a new life to Clara, He could never imagine that the girl would bring him back an even greater teaching about generosity and simplicity. There was in that girl's eyes a serene maturity, built not by books or sophisticated classes, but by the hard and raw experiences that forged her from an early age. At social events and formal gatherings, when introduced to other people from high society, Clara maintained the same posture, polite, discreet, and always humble. He was not dazzled by excessive praise or inevitable comparisons with other children his age. He knew within himself that his trajectory was unique and that, although he now enjoys comfort and stability, he carried in his memory the cold nights and difficult days. In intimate moments with Donna Beatrice, they often sat together in the garden under the warm shade of the leafy trees and talked about the past and the present. In these conversations, Clara expressed in simple words the gratitude she felt, but also the awareness that no matter how much her life had changed, she could never or should never forget where she had come from. This constant reminder was, for her, a silent reminder of who she really was and how much every small gesture of kindness can transform destinies. The transformation that was taking place was not only visible to the eye, but also palpable in the way the girl began to build her own identity within that new world. The old insecurities still surfaced from time to time, like small insistent shadows, but each day Clara grew stronger, allowing the light of affection and trust to illuminate previously untouched spaces within herself. And so, as time went by, that cycle of fear and distrust was, little by little, replaced by something new and powerful, the sensation hitherto unknown of belonging. A belonging built not on the luxury or facilities that now surrounded her, but on the unconditional love that began to grow between her and Donna Beatrice, like firm roots that support a tree against the strongest winds. Even in the face of so many changes, there was still a long way to go, full of discoveries and challenges that would test once again the strength of that girl who, one day, just reached out to help someone fallen on the sidewalk. Even with all the positive changes that surrounded Clara's life, the world around her was still not completely prepared to accept the transformation she was experiencing. The walls of the new home offered security, affection, and stability, but beyond those gates, there was a social universe that often carried old prejudices and silent judgments. The girl's past, although it never defined her essence, still hovered over her like an insistent shadow for some overly attentive eyes. At school, where she remained firm in her studies and impressed teachers with her dedication, social differences and personal stories soon aroused comments that circulated in whispered conversations in the hallways, and especially in meetings between students' parents. Some mothers, surrounded by their exclusive circles of coexistence, could not hide their discomfort in the presence of that girl of such a different origin, sharing the same space with their children. Between sideways glances and phrases spoken, in low tones, they fed a current of distrust disguised as concern. There was always someone ready to remember where Clara had come from. The words were charged with a subtle poison, wrapped in a false concern for the well-being of their own children. They questioned how a girl who had lived on the streets could fit in among children from traditional and influential families. They asked in private meetings if there would be no risk in allowing such coexistence, as if the purity of their homes could be contaminated by a history that did not belong to them. While these comments spread in larger and larger circles, Donna Beatrice, always attentive, followed everything with the firmness of someone who had already faced many judgments in her own trajectory. He knew that the world of high society, although refined in appearance, hid behind its cordial smiles a cold harshness that did not forgive deviations from the established norm. However, he did not allow such murmurs to reach Clara directly. He protected the girl with the serenity of someone who understands that some battles are won with posture and truth, not with open confrontations. Even in the face of veiled judgments, Clara remained serene. The marks of childhood on the streets had taught her to deal with looks of contempt long before she set foot in that school. Those comments, although uncomfortable, could no longer hurt her in the same way. There was a new security within her, built not on the origin she carried, but on the choices she made every day. Choices of kindness, of respect, of constant effort to be better, not for the approval of others, but for herself and out of gratitude for the new chance that had been given to her. As the sharp tongues continued to weave their criticisms, something curious began to happen almost silently. Teachers, initially attentive to Clara's history out of obligation, soon became her biggest defenders. They saw there a dedicated, respectful student full of desire to learn, who never placed herself above anyone, but also did not accept being diminished. Her colleagues, in turn, attracted by Clara's sympathy and lightness, began to seek her company. She knew how to listen, she knew how to share, and she carried a maturity that captivated even those who initially viewed her with suspicion. Inside the house, Donna Beatriz and Clara often talked about these episodes, not to feed resentment, but to further strengthen the understanding that the true measure of a person is not in the judgment of others, but in the peace of those who walk with a clear conscience. Donna Beatriz, with her experience, firmly repeated the lesson she wanted to engrave in the girl's heart. Character does not reside in the origin, but in the daily choices. This inner strength that was growing in Clara began to inspire even some of the most skeptical. Little by little, the mothers who had previously criticized her presence began to observe, albeit unwillingly, the singular brilliance of that girl who disarmed prejudices without even confronting them. It was impossible to ignore the exemplary education, the kindness in dealing with everyone, and the naturalness with which she moved between such different worlds, always with the same sincere smile on her lips. Some of these women, overcome by the force of example, began to silence their comments, while others, in moments of involuntary honesty, recognized among themselves that they had never seen such a centered and educated child, even among those raised in a golden cradle. Clara's elegant and at the same time simple posture slowly began to break through the invisible barriers erected by the initial prejudice. Still, the path was not completely free of thorns. There would always be looks that, even disguised, carried doubts and suspicions. But now Clara no longer bowed to these pressures. She had learned, with life and with Donna Beatriz, to stand on the solid rock of her new identity, without ever denying the past, but also without allowing it to define her. Increasingly sure of herself, Clara went on her way with the same pure essence that years before had made her cross the street on a cold day to help a lady lying on the sidewalk. This simple, compassion-laden gesture had become the seed of the whole story that was now unfolding. And even in the face of challenges and judgments, the girl continued with firm steps and a serene smile to build the foundation of a future that still held new, surprising chapters. Time, with its firm delicacy, continued to draw Clara's trajectory with a precision that not even the greatest screenwriters in life would dare to predict. The years piled up like the turned pages of an intense book, where each chapter brought a new teaching. Each line carried an achievement, and each paragraph held echoes of a story that had begun on a cold sidewalk, under the indifferent gaze of a hurried crowd. Now, there was no longer the fragile girl with short steps and suspicious look from the streets. In front of everyone appeared a young woman of remarkable presence, owner of a serenity that only those who have faced the harshness of life can carry with such lightness. With her studies completed and her graduation in law completed with honors, Clara walked through corridors very different from those she had once walked in fear. The ceremony of his graduation was in itself a symbol of the definitive turning point in his history. Wearing the black gown, with a firm gaze and a restrained smile, she crossed the stage to applause that came not only from teachers and classmates, but also from many who, along her journey, learned to respect her history and recognize the strength with which she had rewritten her destiny. Between the emotional applause, Donna Beatriz's gaze followed her daughter's every move with the same sparkle in her eyes as someone who sees a dream come true in front of her. It was impossible not to remember all the moments of uncertainty, the fears overcome, the nights of insomnia shared, and the understanding silences that over time wove the solid trust between the two. Now, she watched with pride the strong, prepared and determined woman that her little Clara had become. But the young woman would not be content to make her own story an endpoint. There was within her a calling that grew every day, a need to give back to the world the same opportunity that had been given to her. The memory of the cold nights, the children hiding in dark alleys, the faces forgotten on the corners of the city, had never left her. No matter how much his life had changed, those images remained vivid in his memory, not as ghosts of the past, but as constant reminders of the purpose he now carried. It was with this pulsating desire that the Beatrice and Clara Foundation was born. More than a tribute to the woman who had reached out to him and to the very path he had trodden, the foundation represented a beacon of hope for so many other children who, like her one day, wandered invisible through the dark corners of the city. Structured with rigor, planning, and above all with a genuinely committed heart, the foundation soon became a reference not only in the city, but in the entire region. The doors of the institution opened to dozens of orphaned, abandoned, or extremely vulnerable children. There, each one received not only shelter and food, but also quality education, psychological support, cultural activities, and above all, the human welcome that had so often been denied to them. It was an environment built on the basis of the real experience of those who knew in depth what those children carried on their little shoulders. With each new welcome, Clara made a point of knowing each child by name, listening to their stories, and ensuring that each one felt seen and valued. The corridors of the foundation echoed smiles, laughter, and light conversations, but they also welcomed, with the same respect, the tears and silences of those who were still trying to overcome recent traumas. The professionals who worked at the institution, carefully selected, shared the same spirit of mission, understanding that it was not just a shelter, but a second chance at life. At the Foundation's public events, when invited to share her trajectory, Clara always went back to the origin of everything, not with vain pride, but with the sincere gratitude of those who recognize the transforming power of a simple gesture. In his speeches, he often repeated the memory of that decisive day in his life when he reached out to help a lady lying on the sidewalk. The gesture, apparently small and unpretentious, had become the turning point that would unleash the whole chain of events that would take her there. These words, loaded with sincerity, moved those who heard her. Many who were there when they learned the details of his story were confronted with the powerful simplicity of a teaching that is often lost in the midst of the complexities of adult life, the importance of never turning one's face away from those in need. Each of Clara's speeches thus became not only a personal account, but an invitation to reflect on empathy, solidarity, and social responsibility. Over time, the name of the Beatrice and Clara Foundation gained strength, receiving the support of businessmen, government entities, and ordinary people who were sensitive to the cause. Expansion projects began to emerge, allowing even more children to be welcomed, and programs for social reintegration, professionalization, and study stimulation to be implemented with even more quality. Clara's story, which had begun in a silence of abandonment, now echoed as an example of transformation for an entire community. It had become a symbol not only of individual overcoming, but of the strength that resides in the connection between human beings. His career inspired young people, moved adults, and awakened, in many, the desire to make a difference in the space they occupied. Even in the face of success and recognition, Clara remained true to her essence. He continued to walk through the corridors of the foundation, sitting on the floor to play with the younger children, listening carefully to the restless teenagers, and having long conversations with each employee of the institution. He knew that in order to keep the mission of that place alive, it was necessary to remain close to the roots, never losing sight of the reason why it all existed. And so, while the foundation grew and gained new contours, inside Clara continued to beat the same pure and generous heart of the girl who one day only wanted to help someone who had fallen on the way. His past was no longer a wound, but the solid foundation on which he had built a present full of meaning and a future full of possibilities that would still lie ahead of him. Time, tireless in its silent rhythm, advanced with the same delicacy with which it had shaped each chapter of Clara's story. The seasons came and went, the years piled up smoothly, and the routine of the Beatrice and Clara Foundation followed its course, welcoming new lives, building new futures. Behind that growth, the foundation stood firm, sustained by the deep bond between the two women who in the distant past had been united by the simplest of gestures. But now, the days brought with them another reality, subtly announced by the high signs that Donna Beatrice's body could no longer hide. Health, which for so many years had sustained the firmness of his presence, began to weaken with the natural weight of age. Walks through the gardens became shorter, social gatherings were spaced out, and long conversations on the balcony gave way to moments of silent contemplation, where only the look exchanged between her and Clara carried the words that fatigue no longer allowed her to pronounce. Despite this, the strength of her spirit remained intact, as if she wanted, until the end, to follow every step her daughter took, proud of the woman who had blossomed before her eyes. Clara, in turn, dedicated herself even more to caring for her mother. He divided his time between the tasks of the foundation and the precious hours with Donna Beatrice, accompanying her with affection, making sure that every detail of his routine transmitted the same love he had once received from her. The roles, which had once been of protection and teaching, were now smoothly reversed, and the young woman became the safe support for the one who had given her a new life. There was no sadness in that care, but a deep gratitude, a serene surrender that transcended any obligation. The afternoons they could spend together were filled with shared memories, suppressed smiles, and a comfortable silence that only deeply connected hearts can enjoy. As the days passed, Donna Beatrice seemed to want to transmit in small gestures and simple words the last teachings to her daughter. Long looks, long handshakes, and brief whispers became the delicate thread that united their last moments of coexistence. 1. Morning. When the sun filtered its golden light through the curtains of the large room, Donna Beatrice felt that the moment of her departure was approaching. The doctors, although discreet, had already warned Clara about the delicate state of her mother's health, and the young woman, even with a heavy heart, was silently preparing for that inevitable outcome. That day, when she was called to her room, Claire approached with the serenity she had cultivated over the years. She sat down by the bedside, gently holding the hand that had guided her so many times at the beginning of her new walk. Donna Beatrice's face, although marked by timelines, preserved the softness and dignity that had always defined her. His eyes, slightly moist, fixed on Clara's with a brightness that mixed love, pride, and the serenity of someone who had fulfilled his mission. In a weak but clear voice, she conveyed to her daughter what she had carried with her since the first day their lives intersected. She revealed with touching tenderness that she had always believed that the real rescue had not been hers for Clara, but from Clara for her. Because on that cold day when she fell on the sidewalk, surrounded by indifferent faces, it was that small outstretched hand that rekindled her hope, her faith, and her sense of living. The words, although spoken with effort, carried a depth that touched Clara's soul directly. It was a truth that, although he had already intuited, now gained the strength of a final and precious confession. The silent tears ran down the young woman's face as she gently squeezed her mother's hand, as if trying to prolong that moment as long as possible. It was impossible to contain the emotion in the face of the greatness of that farewell, but it was also impossible not to recognize the beauty that existed in that last surrender of love. There was no fear, just a deep and eternal connection, built on the solid foundation of everything they lived together. The room, bathed in the soft morning light, seemed to suspend time around the two of them. Every second lengthened, allowing them both to feel in the silence of that moment the full extent of the journey they had taken since the day their destinies crossed on the sidewalk of the city. The tears that ran down their faces were not of despair but of recognition and gratitude for an unlikely story that had found meaning precisely in the purity of a simple and disinterested gesture. And so, in that instant of full surrender between mother and daughter, the bond between them became even stronger, crossing time and space, while Donna Beatrice's breathing became lighter and lighter, as if, finally, she could rest in peace, knowing that her greatest mission had been fulfilled perfectly. And in the end, it is impossible not to think about how life, with all its unexpected paths, can be transformed by something as simple as reaching out at the right moment. Clara's story is not only hers, she carries a little of all of us, of this silent desire to believe that kindness still makes sense, that love still builds bridges even in the most unlikely scenarios. If you've made it this far, leave it in the comments. I believe in the power of a gesture because that's exactly what we're talking about today. And if these stories touch your heart the way they touch mine as a story, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel so we go together in each new story that shows how much life can surprise. Oh, and leave your like too, because this helps the channel to continue bringing these stories that make us reflect, move, and often see life with different eyes. There's a video here on the side that tells a similar story. Click and stay with me there.